Now, in this video, we're going to be taking it to a completely different level and showing you about what happens when you are starved. And in order to do that, I'm going to need you, first of all, to pause the video. Believe it or not, go down below. We're going to have another PDF for you to fill out. This is an actual assessment called the Starved Spiral Survey. And I'm going to have you go through that survey and answer all of the questions. Each of you answer them on your own. Fill it out because we're going to need it in a few minutes, okay? Pause the video, get down right now, and fill out that survey. Okay, welcome back. So you filled out your profiles, right? And you got every answer taken care of. Now, I bet some of you wanted to kind of make up your own profile, didn't you? You wanted to put some in-betweens. Well, I hope you didn't, okay? It's a 4-scale. I want you to choose yes or no on each one of them. Now, remember, I've used this with thousands of couples. This works. This is going to show you where you are in the spiral in your marriage. Are you starved, and what's the impact of starved doing to your relationship? Now, get your profiles out, and I hope at the very back, the very last page of the profile, there's a little area where you can tally up your scores. Okay? I need you to make sure you've gone through and tallied up all of your scores because you're going to need those scores as we go through this. So if you haven't tallied them, pause the button right now and go get those tallies made. If you've done it, then let's just keep going. Every single couple that is starved falls into what I call the starved spiral. It's a fairly simple thing that I learned, believe it or not, as a divorce mediator. I spent a couple years working as a divorce mediator, helping couples terminate their long-term relationship. It was a horrible job, okay? But I noticed that all these couples that came in basically kept doing the exact same thing. Every couple seemed to follow this pattern. And after seeing couple after couple, the pattern emerged for me. And that's what I call the starved spiral. Almost universally, every single person that feels starved in a relationship starts to worry about one person over everyone else. Starved people tend to become fairly selfish people. Starved people worry about themselves. And when you start to worry about yourself in a relationship, you're going to start to decay. And you're going to start to create problems because you're going to worry about you when your partner is only worrying about them. Now, here's the dilemma. Do you remember when you got married, you were so in love, you had a cake at your wedding, you cut the cake, and you picked the cake up, right? And you remember when you were supposed to feed each other the cake? What did you do with it? Did you shove that cake right up your wife's nose? Did she have to hork cake out? Nothing prettier than a bride horking cake out, right? The symbol of cutting cake at a marriage is all about feeding. It's all about feeding your partner. That's the symbolic promise and gesture you're making as you're feeding your partner the cake. I will constantly feed you. The problem is once we get starved, we get selfish and we stop feeding our partner and we start feeding ourselves. So the first one we need to worry about is selfishness, okay? The first thing we're checking out is selfishness. That is the beginning of the starved spiral. Remember, selfishness is where you start to worry more about you in the relationship than your partner. And in order to create a long-term, healthy, happy relationship, we can't be so selfish. Now, in order to know what your scores were, go back to the last page where we tallied up all of your numbers. In the first section, A, write in the word selfishness. The A segment of that profile is all about selfishness. And if you scored 3 or higher, you are trending more selfish in the relationship. The problem with selfishness in the relationship is that it opens up all other problems. When we first got married, we were sure our partner would only love us and take care of us. We even promised to each other we'd take care of each other. And the reality is, if your scores are getting above 3 in the selfishness category, you're starting to be in the spiral. The second behavior that I worry about in the spiral is what I call reactivity. Reactivity is where we start to make all of our decisions in the relationship not based on our highest principles and values, but our mood, our situation, and our circumstances. Reactivity is the #1 driver of most of these behaviors. The more reactive we get in the relationship, the less we tend to trust each other. An example I use of reactivity is if I took a Coke bottle and shook it, I would create a reaction. And if I handed you the bottle, would you open it? Probably not. You'd probably pass it to your partner and let him open it, right? The reality of our relationships is if we are highly reactive, we don't trust those reactions. And so we've measured you on this. Go to section B on your tally sheet and fill in the word reactivity. That is your reactivity score. If you're showing 3 or more on that score, you're in a fairly reactive relationship. And the problem with reactivity is it usually begets reactivity. I react to my wife, she reacts to me. And the sad thing about that is that means nobody is actually living their values in the relationship. The other problem with reactivity is we tend to feel justified to hurt each other. Based on your values, you'd never want to hurt each other, right? But you do when you're reactive. Reactive people hurt each other. Okay? So that's the second part of the spiral. We get selfish, then we start reacting to each other. When we think about it, that's probably what's impacting your relationship. What if right now both of you could just stop reacting? What if I could stop hurting you and you could stop hurting me? Wouldn't that change everything? Well, look at it. If you have high selfishness and reactivity scores, that's something you could do right now. Stop it. Well, yeah, but I will when she will. Well, I will when he will. This doesn't end if we just keep reacting to each other. We've got to get through this. Reactive people tend to create the most common universal relationship issue that's out there. I also believe it's the #1 communication problem we have, and it's called polarization. Polarization is a really big deal, and I'll bet you as we get into discussing it, you're going to see that it is rabid in your relationship, okay? Polarization is where you two have the ability to take any issue, drop it in between you, and you'll become polarized on it. That's why in most marriages that are really struggling, we tend to have spenders and savers, complete opposites. We tend to have one person that's always wanting more intimacy and one that always has a headache. Complete opposites. That's why we have a really mean disciplinarian and a real soft one. We tend to polarize every issue in our marriage. Spenders, savers, I call them saints and sinners. The one that's so saintly that never does anything wrong and the one that does everything right. The reality is we've got polarization. In your marriage, do you have it? Do you tend to become opposites on everything? Does it even matter what drops in between you? If so, you've got polarization. And the best way to know is the next 2 questions we're going to evaluate you on, okay? So section C in your little assessment, mark next to it, pursuer. And section D, mark next to it, withdrawer. Okay? The polarizing pattern is made up of 2 fairly simple behaviors. Are you ready for these? And tell me if this doesn't bring back some seriously scary memories, okay? Pursuers, section C. On section C, if you have 4 or more answers yes, true, you are a pursuer. Meaning, you are the aggressive communicator. You're the one that is most inclined to take all of the smoky issues and push, push, push. Pursuers, they're great people. We love you to death. And the reality is, you're the one that gets the party started. You're the one that starts the talking. You're the one that gets it going. And usually, you tend to get it going on your agenda. Pursuers are what I call the talkers. The talkers usually talk for a very important reason, because they want progress, right? Talkers just want progress. We want to get this conversation going. So as the talkers go for progress, they're usually going to find out that their partner is exactly the opposite of that. So check down to the next section, section D, and if you have 4 or more truths on section D, you are what we call a withdrawer. The withdrawer is the person who would much rather walk from the conversation than have it. Okay? A lot of times we call these husbands. Not always, though, okay? Sometimes the walkers can be the females. 70% of the time, did you know that the pursuers are the ladies? And about 70% of the time, the withdrawers tend to be the men. And you know what? It doesn't matter which one you are. In fact, you may have both of them. You know what that means? That means you're seriously messed up and you need help. That's what it means. Not true. It just means you'll use any technique to deal with your starved pain, right? Pursuers turn into talkers. They want progress. Withdrawers turn into walkers. And what do they want? Why do they walk away? Have you ever asked that? Why does your partner walk away from every serious discussion that we have? You know why? It's not because they're wusses. It's not because they're fraidy cats. It's not because they can't take it. It's because they want peace. And every single time we tend to talk about our smoke and our starve stuff, we don't get peace. We get a conflict. We get a fight. We feel like we're beaten down or hurt or taken advantage of. So it ends up being your partner's need for progress at the expense of the withdrawer's need for peace. So peace and progress end up being at odds with each other. What if we could have a conversation where you and your partner could finally get progress in a peaceful way? What if we could do every conversation in a peaceful way so that one of us doesn't have to withdraw and one of us doesn't have to keep chasing in our anxiety? The problem comes down to when we have the polarizing pattern of pursuer-withdrawer, it creates some major problems for us. And here's what it looks like, okay? And see if you don't have this in your relationship. It really is one of the most dominant predictors of divorce in marital relationships. Here's how it looks. Are you ready? Pursuers chase withdrawers, and withdrawers run. Okay? Why are they running? Because you're chasing. Well, I wouldn't chase if you wouldn't run. Well, I wouldn't run if you wouldn't chase. And it turns into a system. You ever done that in your marriage? Hey, can we talk about the taxes, you ask? And then your partner has to leave. I got to go. I got to go to work. And then we never talk about the tax bill that we haven't dealt with. Or we never talk about how we parent together. Or we never talk about the financial problems we're having because we always have this pursuer-withdrawer. This pattern is fairly simple and is very emblematic and symbolic. You've probably seen it in the dog chasing its tail. Have you ever felt like when you're talking with your partner, it always just feels like we're going nowhere? The dog and tail routine, right? That's the pattern. If you have it in your marriage, you better watch out. Now, some people just chase their partner till they run away. Okay? And some corner them at 11 o'clock at night. Think about your marriage. What happens when you corner your partner in a conversation about 11 o'clock at night? Does that usually go well for you guys? Or does somebody either end up running away, going to another room, and withdrawing, or do they come back? And do they turn into something uglier? Okay, we call them the pursuer. So sometimes withdrawers will actually change and become a pursuer. You ever seen that one? Then the two pursuers can go head to head. That's where the ugly fights come in. You ever see that in your marriage? Where you fight over the stupidest stuff? And you don't even know why? And when two pursuers go head to head, you can predict what's going to happen, can't you? Row, cat gets hurt, tons of smoke. We start to fight. There comes the smoke that we talked about in video number 1. Do you have the smoke in your marriage? If you do, odds are you have the pursuer-withdrawer pattern going on. Once we blow up, we explode on each other. We can't take it anymore. This person withdraws, which, by the way, if you remember, was their initial goal. And then this person withdraws. Now we have two people completely withdrawn from each other, totally apart, not talking, hopeless, alone, discouraged, unsafe, lack of trust, unappreciated, disrespected, invalidated, discouraged, and no dedication. It's called starved. Two people miles apart, starved, and the issue, whatever issue they were talking about, falls unresolved. Money, we didn't deal with it. Sex, didn't deal with it. Kids, friends, all of these issues pile up until we have a huge wall between us and we're miles apart. That is the pattern. That's the pattern that's killing you. Do you have it? If you have it in your marriage, guess what? It's got to be solved. It's polarization by name. Polarization's broken into two categories, pursuer and withdrawer. And here's my reality and my belief on this. It doesn't matter why you do this. It's broken. It's dysfunctional. It doesn't work. It doesn't serve you. We can blame your parents for it and their dysfunction. We can blame that you're Irish and you just are angry. We can blame it on whatever you want. I've heard it blamed on everything, including their partner. And the reality is, it's polarizing you. If we don't learn to fix this, if you don't learn to come together in the conversation and create progress and not run, and create peace together, guess what? Your issues will just keep mounting. You can always divorce. I guess that's the good news, isn't it? The problem is you're always going to divorce as a pursuer and a withdrawer and a polarizing person who's reactive and selfish. It doesn't go away. We can try to blame it on everyone else, but don't ever end a relationship in this pattern. You've got to fix it. And by the way, the best way to fix it is if you're a pursuer, shut it. Shut your cake hole is what I tell my clients. Shut it. Just be in the space. And if you're a withdrawer, stay put. And what we teach you to do is to start feeling peace together. And we start to learn how to talk. Ask yourself this right now. What's one thing you know you need to do right now to be less of a pursuer? What's one thing you need to do right now to be less of a withdrawer? Do it. Write down those answers. That's what you can do right now to change your marriage. You don't have to take hours and hours of training. Just do what you know you already need to do. The reality is you struggle with it because you're already reactive and you're already getting selfish. So, do you see the pattern in your relationship? If so, we got to get out of the spiral, or you're going to just end up like every other couple that has the pursuer-withdrawer pattern. So, the first behavior we worry about is selfishness. Second is reactivity. Third is polarization. The fourth, though, is pretty interesting as well, and it's a byproduct of dealing with this over and over. It's called negative interpretation. Negative interpretation is one of the most common holes that I see that couples fall into. And it is so difficult to reverse. It can be reversed, especially when we get rid of reactivity and we start having conversations together. The negative interpretation is very simply this. If you took 100 things that your partner does every single day, the negative interpreter is going to only pick out the 5 negatives, the things that they didn't like. They're going to start nitpicking the little things that you don't like about your partner. And it's a byproduct of all of this pain you're in. The pain eventually turns you into someone who only sees the negative. And negative interpreters tend to beget negative interpretation, right? So negative interpreters tend to see negative. They're going to pick out every little bad point of your day, and they're going to keep throwing it down as if it's broken. The hardest part about negative interpretation in your marriage is it doesn't matter what's really happening. You could be doing a lot of great stuff. You could be serving each other exactly the way you think they want to be served, and in the reality, if they're a negative interpreter, it won't matter what they're doing. It's always going to be wrong. This is where you start to hear complaints like, I can't do anything for you. Everything I do with you is wrong. Those are signs that you have negative interpretation. So go down to your survey to section E. Next to section E, write in the words negative interpretation and look at your scores. On your scores about negative interpretation, do you have a 3 or higher of true? If you answered 3 or higher true, you are becoming a negative interpreter. And I'll bet you bucks, if you're a negative interpreter, there's a pretty good shot that your partner is too. This negative interpretation is what starts to seriously poison our brains. It poisons all of the data in the relationship because all data gets skewed negatively. Okay, so notice where we are in the spiral. We get selfish, then we start reacting to each other. The reactivity causes and creates polarization. Polarization starts to work our head and gets us feeling negative. And we start only aggregating negative data. Some people get so negative that they actually go back and start creating a new history. They rewrite their history as if negative. Like, I don't know if I ever loved you. I don't know that I ever really wanted to be in this relationship. In fact, there's some really interesting research about couples that tell their stories about how they met in a negative way. If you tell your story of how you met, where you first met, how long you dated, and when you got married, if you tell that story with a lot of negativity, like, we were really young, we probably fell in love too quick and got married really fast, if you slant it negative, odds are you're a negative interpreter, and it has a high likelihood of divorce and relationship problems, okay? So, negative interpretation, is it in your relationship? The next one is hopelessness. This is a sad behavior because this starts to impact everything. The minute you start to feel hopeless, oh boy, game on. Because hopeless people, really, if you think of it, it's a byproduct of negativity. Once we get negative, we get hopelessness, and it sets in. And when it sets in, we start to become complacent. Like, this pattern's never going to change. My future is going to be horrible based on my past. The reality is that's just a myth. We already talked about that in the first section. It's a simple myth that needs to be blown up. Your hopelessness is a byproduct of how you're living your life every single day. Check your scores on hopelessness. Go to section F of your survey, and on the survey, if you have 3 or more, guess what? You're starting to feel hopeless in the relationship. Hopelessness, I found, is usually because we're not acting. If we're not acting on learning how to do this and change it, we're going to feel hopeless. Think about it. If you have a really big problem and you're not doing anything about it, and you don't know how to overcome the problem, you're going to feel hopeless. In the programs I teach, there's a very simple, basic way to overcome hopelessness, and that is simply this. Take on the challenge and start learning a way to fix it, and then act on it every single day. And when you do, you'll get away from the hopelessness. Those two things that I had you identify about your relationship that you know would stop your polarization, if you would act on those two things today, I'll promise you, you'll both start feeling hopeful, especially if you start positively interpreting what you see your partner doing. That's how we start to reverse the spiral. You can do it with your partner, and they can do it with you. The last thing we look at is the simple behavior of abandoning. Once somebody feels tired and hopeless and exhausted and worn out, they're much more inclined to abandon. So go to your score, look at the very last score on the bottom. If you have 3 or more, call it abandoning. You're ready to abandon the relationship. It doesn't mean you'll abandon it immediately, and not everybody that has abandoned a relationship actually goes to divorce. You all know people that have been married a very, very long time, and they still aren't in the relationship. Abandoning. Do you have it in your marriage? Once you start to think about abandoning, that's where you start to search the alternatives. That's where you start to think, okay, if I did divorce him, where would I go? What would I do? How would I pay for myself? Once you're into that, you really are deep into the starved relationship. I need you to be thinking about this. How can you and your partner stop this spiral? How do we stop it so we don't just have to follow it right into the ground and have it crash? How do we turn this around? Well, you've already started it. The neatest thing about it is 50% of the marriages out there end in divorce, and you are now doing something about it. I seriously applaud you. Of the thousands and thousands of people out there, you and your partner are now sitting down together doing something about this. The powerful thing about that is you're starting. Now, are you going to finish? Are you going to do more? Are you going to connect at even a deeper level? One of my favorite rules in all of this coaching that I do with couples is that 2 heads are better than 1. If both of you would get your head wrapped around this, that's better than 1 head getting wrapped around it. But here's something even more important. 1 head may be more important than 0. Maybe right now in your relationship there's only 1 of you that can start doing this. My challenge to you is to start doing it. Don't wait. Start doing what you can to get out of the starved spiral. And when we go into our next section, that's what we're going to get into. Real-life solutions. Very deep, real-life solutions that you and your partner can make with each other to start changing the spiral. So we hope you've enjoyed this video number 2 of 3, and we really want you to give us your comments. If you have any questions or things you need answered or just further clarification, send us a little email comment below and we'll get back to you on that. Also, be looking in your email for video number 3. We'll be sending that along very quickly. And maybe most importantly, make sure you go live what you're doing. Remember, our goal here is to help you. And we can't help you more than you can help yourself. Take the ideas you've learned and start integrating them into your life. Also, if you know people that need this message and need a shot at this free video, will you please pass it along and let them see it as well? Remember, we're here to help, and we're going to help you even more on the next video when we get into solutions. Thanks for joining us.